Hello, everybody. Welcome to JavaScript Jabber. We are Chuckless today. I am Steve Edwards, the other bald host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. With me, coming live from the Purple Room, is Mr. AJ O'Neill. How you doing, AJ?
Yo, Steve.
Yo. Whatever happened to yo, yo, yo?
Take it away, Steve.
All right. Today, in the tradition of a multinational podcast, we have Mr. Vitor Alencar. How you doing, Vitor?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. And where are you coming to us today from?
So yeah, I'm right now in Berlin, Germany.
Berlin. Okay. So we are here to discuss a topic called module federation and what it is and how it works and why it's important. I'm not sure how many of you are like me that when you hear the term federation, you instantly think Star Trek. But that is
Did
not
you mean
what
Star
we're-
Wars?
Huh?
Did you
No.
mean Star Wars?
Star Trek, the Federation of Planets, United Federation of Planets.
I
Are you
guess
getting your stars mixed up, AJ?
I was thinking episode 1 and, taxation without representation. Never mind.
Oh, right. No, that's the Imperial Senate, and that's different. You need to go read up on your star history, I think.
I do. I do.
Anyway, moving on to our topic. But before we get to the topic, Vitor, why don't you tell us a little more about yourself, who you are, what you do, why you're famous, why people should give you money, etc.
Of course. So as you know, my name is Vitor Alencar. I'm actually from Brazil, so I've been living here in Berlin for quite a while now. I'm a senior engineer and now engineer manager in one of the startups here called Fin. I've been doing content creation for the past 3 years. So this is why I got to meet amazing people like then, right? So I started to talk about JavaScript and about JavaScript and scale as well. So lately I've been joining a lot of events and sharing a lot of talks like Module Federation. And yeah, this is why I'm here today.
Excellent. Okay, so let's dive right in. What is Module Federation?
Yeah, so basically Module Federation is a feature on Webpack that allows you to distribute your code in a decentralized way. So it's take leverage of more micro frontends. So pretty much, I think all the companies that I know that get to a certain point that they are super huge and they really want to still introduce greenfield projects, they struggle with centralized front end. And
What does that mean? That's not a real term. Centralized front end.
Yeah, I have to admit I haven't heard that term before either, at least in this context.
Yeah, just because same as the backend, right? I think at some point people start to decouple backend service from monolith to microservice, and now they're trying to get back to monolith, but in a more flexible way. You have the same thing for the front end, right? You have a big front end, and how do you introduce new technologies? Just think about Air France, for example. They have a huge system on how you book tickets and how you go from start to finish in the checkout process. And if they wanted to introduce a different framework now, that would be pretty hard, right? I think their system cannot stop or they're gonna lose a lot of money. So how do you break this down in a way that you don't stop, but you allow you to test new stuff and to also divide teams so you can do stuff in parallel, basically.
Well, wouldn't you isn't that just called a web page? You just have a different page and it loads different scripts?
No, not really, right? Just imagine that you have 150 developers working in the same system. At some point, they're gonna run into trouble and bump into each other, right? So you have usually how the companies go. You have teams that they start in the beginning, checking just the start of the flow, how people come from Google and they land on your page. So they have different metrics, and then you have teams that do the checkout part. They're very much interesting of customer just pushing things to checkout and finalizing the process. And usually, if you want to run a lot of A/B tests, you have to be very careful, right? Because those features can collide to each other. So usually, what happens is that you have different teams doing different parts of the system, but they're still like working the same system. So the idea is with module federation, you can create like you can encapsulate those modules with all their business logic, and then you can allow people to consume them remotely at runtime. This can give you more flexibility to divide in different teams that would be very specialized in different areas of the same system. So they can have their own deployment. They're not gonna like bump into each other. They can work in parallel, and yeah, they can be more specialized.
Okay, so if I understand you, this is specific to one micro front ends that are using Webpack. Did I understand that correctly, or is this a bigger
Yeah, now I think
scope than
more
that?
bundlers are supporting this, but Webpack was like the bundler that actually made the feature available at the beginning. It was very specific for Webpack. Now I think Rollup has adopted, and RSpec is also providing support for module federation. So now it's getting more and more spread out, basically.
So on the back end,
Yeah.
if I want to try a new framework or something, I just create a different service and then I have an API boundary. And
Yeah.
so the services are completely separate. And when one needs to speak to the other,
Mhm.
it just calls the HTTP API and grabs it. Or in some cases, if I'm feeling really lucky, I might talk to the database of the other service directly, but that's generally ends in sadness.
Yeah.
So when I think about a front end and having different applications, I think the same thing. You do a redirect, you have URL parameters.
Mhm.
So, redirects, it has some parameters so that it can load the state in the other app, can redirect back. And that's how OAuth works and lots of other things where, OAuth is essentially a microservice on the front end. So is this like, how does this compare to that kind of model? Because
Yes.
I don't have a brain space for this yet.
Yeah. So just imagine that you have like, let's say, an e-commerce, right? Website.
Yeah.
And you notice because let's say you start with Angular 1 and now you really wanted to push to try a specific team to use React. This would be very messy, right? Either you're going to have to completely isolate one part of your system, have a full redirect, and then have a different module being like, another URL loading. With module federation, the idea is you can create what they call a host. A host will load modules, right? And you
Is that
can,
is that a web page? What is that? What does that look like?
yeah. So basically, there's this two basic concepts in module federation. One is the host, one is the remote, right? So imagine a page that this page is going to be the entry point of all your JavaScript.
Index.html.
Yes, exactly. This page
Okay.
will load Webpack and will just orchestrate what's going to happen afterwards. This is what we call the host. I'm going to host modules, and those modules can be fetched at runtime. So you can have your index page, and now what you can do, basically, you can have different remotes. Those remotes, there are pieces of logic, self-encapsulated, that can be even different frameworks. So you could have your button, like the checkout button, being served from a different host or a different remote, sorry, that's React. And your whole application can still be Angular, but you're trying this specific module that's in a different remote. So now you can have those pieces like being orchestrated at runtime. And you can define which pieces of your software are different remotes. So you can divide them, you can divide teams to work specifically with parts of the system, and they all live inside the same host. So it's like Lego pieces, right? You can encapsulate it in little containers that they know how to run. They have their own business logic, and they can be fetched at runtime.
So I'm guessing then the host has to contain the router and has to communicate the params between these components / apps.
Yeah, it's the host is responsible for injecting the remote to the page, right? Like telling how you're going to run, basically. So the host has to decide how to resolve all the dependencies and how to basically orchestrate how things will run. So when you're defining a remote, for example, you define a set of properties that say, okay, I need React version X, I need those dependencies. Let's say I use Tailwind or whatever. And when the host is getting this remote, it's going to try to resolve those dependencies. But this is happening at runtime. So it's like it's promise based, and you can literally consume those things over the wire. Yeah. And I think it's pretty good, especially for, like I mentioned, like big systems, right? Like you have to scale your product, you have to keep innovating. And especially with legacy systems, it's very hard to move things forward because you have a lot of logic, you have a lot of structure that was built over time. And to have this flexibility of to say, okay, I'm going to get the banner, V1 banner from this remote here, specific remote that's hosted as a S3 file, for example, at AWS, and say, yeah, I'm going to have a different checkout that's being hosted like from another S3 file, and be able to change those configurations on the fly. It's very nice. It gives you a lot of different possibilities.
It seems that the trend has been more vertical integration. So if I'm using, I'm not really a front end person.
Mm-hmm.
I do JavaScript libraries for the front end, and I do Node and Go on the back end. But things are becoming more vertically integrated. You have stuff like Vite, and I don't know what all the other ones are, but typically your build process is streamlined the whole way through. So it sounds like this would require a different build process.
Yeah, I mean, you can still have, for example, let's say a mono repo, right, with all your different micro front ends. And the only like requirement, especially in the beginning, was that you have to install this plugin from Webpack, the module federation. And then you tell like your configuration files, like the host and remote configuration files in the Webpack config. And this will tell how you bundle the application. So it gets decentralized because you're literally like building static JavaScript or sharing how to consume JavaScript over the wire. So you can have still like a monorepo setup that has all your like dependencies and how you interact with them. It's just that how you deploy those applications, it looks very much like you're gonna host a static website, for example, and just push to like SC3 bucket, for example. And then you can have versions of it. You can still versioning it and it's still gonna work. It's just that now you can have those micro projects very specialized that specific teams can work on it.
Well, what I mean is, like, people use something where there's an init command and it boilerplates out their project.
Yeah.
And then they use a build command and a dev command, and it's kind of for it's for the whole, the whole project.
Yes.
So does this, with Webpack, is there something like that where you can init? Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that this is for when you already have a project that's been established and you want to add something else into it. But how does that work with things like what, Steve, you're going to have to help me out. What are the current build systems on the front end right now?
Well, like I said, Vite is the one that seems to pretty much taken the world by storm, and it uses, well, Vite does the hot module reloading and all that, but then it uses rollup under the hood to actually do the bundling for deployment to
Yeah,
production. You got Webpack, and there was another one. Was it Turbo? I don't know if it's 37 Signals Turbo. There's another one that
There's a
had a
Turbo
whole thing.
Pack.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
there's
next
a few.
is next in that same category? Or
No, like Turbo
No.
would be the bundler for Next.js.
Yeah, Next
Okay.
is a React tool.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about it, not being a React person, but yeah, but no, Next, and that's a different area.
But the module federation plugin is available in like a very large like number of bundlers. So you can use with Webpack, but you're not restricted to it. Like RSpec supports it, Vite supports it as well. So you can use with Vite, right? Like you can use with Rollup, ES Build. So all those tools, like all of them,
Okay.
support this scenario. So you can have actually what you say, that you're going to enter the project, run your dev command, right? And you can even specify, I want to run just this micro front end. I want to run the whole application. So spin up all the micro front ends, or all like the remotes with this host. And you can have this running with just one simple command. So, and also for the build, right? You can just go and say, yeah, build my application, and I'm going to just orchestrate the deployment or like the build process for all of those micro front ends within this project. So you're not restricted in terms of setup. The whole idea is to give you more flexibility. So the bundling is almost like, it's actually almost the opposite. So now you have those small JavaScript files that tells you like, okay, I'm self-contained. I contain all my dependencies here. So let's give you a more concrete example, right? So let's say that you have a specific place in your system that you use a date format library, but you only use in this specific place. So this can be a part of the micro front end, and you're only gonna consume this dependency once you go to the specific place where this dependency is loaded. So in runtime, you'll not only get the whole module, but you get the dependencies that come with it. So you're like literally saying, okay, my application now doesn't depend on this library to boot. Basically, I can access it, and every other page that doesn't use it, I'm not going to load it. But when I get to the specific point, I'm going to load this micro front end, this remote, and I'm going to load all those dependencies as well. And yeah, that's all over the wire. So you can easily see the network requests being made and all the JavaScript coming over the wire, and how Webpack, for example, will load and run it.
So here's a question I think of when I think of modules is, does, there's always the conversion from the old common JS required to ES6. Where does that play into this whole structure? Does it?
I don't think so, because it's more like how the bundler, like in this case, how the plugin will read your module, right? So it is already pushed with some Webpack meta tags, so it really understands what type of like remote you're getting from. So if it's just like, for example, it's just a piece of JavaScript that you want to share, it's just going to run it, right? If you have any dependency, it's going to try to look for the module resolution, which is like you're going to try to see where this dependency is coming from, and then enable this for the user. So it doesn't really collide with the modules that you see in Node.js. It's not about that. It's more like how you consume those little bits of JavaScript through the plugin. So that's like the plugin, the module federation plugin knows how to do the module resolution for you.
So if you want to use module federation, then this is it'd be a Webpack plugin or a Vite plugin that you drop in.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming in the plugin, you're going to have some configuration about routes for where your remotes are, or your hosts
Yes.
are.
Yes, you create basically the declaration of a host and a remote. So you say that you have an application that's host, I'm going to consume different remotes. And for every remote, you have also a declaration that say, I'm a remote, I'm going to be hosted at this specific place. Those are my dependencies. This is what I need to run. And when you load a remote into a host, the host tries to resolve those dependencies and to load the specific piece of code. So it's pretty cool when you want to have, for example, different frameworks running in the same page. Or let's say that I don't know how familiar you are with, for example, Redux. I think Redux was super popular like not long ago. And the idea that you have a centralized store. So what you can actually have, let's say that you have the way that you communicate with your front end is through messaging. So you send a message, say, hey, I have the state. This is the state transformation. And you have a remote that's just responsible for the store. So now you have a remote that knows all the data. And then you can make this remote to talk with different frameworks. So I even have an example, for example, in one of the talks that I share, a web application that I built. There was a e-commerce where every step was a different framework, just to show that we can have Vite, we can have Svelte, we can have React, and we can have pure JavaScript talking with the same store and all responding in real time. So there was no like reloading of the page, nothing. It was like they're all talking to a data layer, and this data layer is updating the data, and I'm consuming those remotes in runtime. So if I want to say, okay, now I'm just gonna have React on this website, then I would change the remotes to only point to the React ones. If I want to say now I want to have this mismatch of like React and Vite, I can also do that. So adopting new frameworks could be easier because of this architecture. And of course, there's some pros and cons, right? Like there is some like advanced strategies, but this is pretty cool because I think very big companies now they're really using it, um, and that's become more and more common to see. So, for example, like the TikTok web page use module federation to load different modules, and other big like e-commerce like Lululemon, they also use very heavily module federation. And for them, it's pretty nice because it really means that the way that they do A/B testing, it can be very much efficient. Like you can have different teams build different product grids, and if one fails, let's say there is a bug in one, with just changing a feature flag or something they can do on remotely on their side, they can share a totally different configuration. So the next time that you reload the page, you have a different sets of remotes, and you consume different versions of those like encapsulated logic bits.
So it seems like this is a lot of work on the remote end, right? Because you basically have to define all your different remotes and your URLs and where the code is. So is the code just sitting? I mean, for instance, could you pull it from npm? Are these GitHub repos that code sitting in? Is this compiled code sitting where that you're pulling in? How does that whole process work when you're in terms of defining your remotes?
Yeah. So you have two different strategies. We have basically configuration that you define at build time. So you can define like before building your application or your sets of remotes and all your entry points basically, right? You can say, okay, I have a host and I have three different remotes. All my analytics, they're a different remote. All my UI comes from a different remote, and that's cool. But they also have some like advanced strategies, what we call dynamic remotes, where you basically create a function that can get a specific remote at runtime as well. So you can tell your system to say, okay, right now, depending on a feature flag, please fetch this different remote. So basically, everything that you can predict that you're going to need at build time, you can just specify in this webpack config in the host and remote. But you also can consume them as like a variable in your system that you say, hey, by the way, now try to fetch this remote that are going to pass as a URL as a variable and try to load it. And then you can have some try catch, right, to prevent something to happen if you cannot reach the network layer or if you have to take into account any kind of missing package, basically. And there is tools nowadays that they really help you to orchestrate this because the same as Docker containers, right? If you go to the backend, that would be the most close analogy, I think, that you have your system, you have to scale and you orchestrate how many machines you have. You have auto scaling, so you can have pretty much the same idea in the front end. And you have, for example, dashboards like Medusa that really tells you it's quite a crazy. Like you see there, okay, I have this product here, my e-commerce, and those are the micro front ends that I'm requesting at runtime, and those are the versions. And you click a button, and they can change the version, and then your application would just react to it, and you don't have to redeploy it, basically. So you can do this whole orchestration also at your side in your dashboard and trying to connect those modules together.
So what is it sounds like the idea of this is being able to handle multiple front ends, right? Multiple, whether it's different frameworks or whatever your use case may be. What do you think? And is there a hard line? What is like minimum scale where you would want to start using something like this? Like two separate frameworks, five, what?
That's a very good question. I think when I give talks about module federation, right, and micro frontends, people get all excited. Like with all JavaScript frameworks, they wanted to try it right away. But I usually what I recommend is like it's about scaling of teams. I think at first, so I would not try to do this at small products because there isn't. I think the benefits are not there. Like small and applications, I think when you go to medium to larger size and especially of team size, then it starts to make sense, right? Because I think the flexibility that you get here is that you can have specialized teams. You can have the checkout team that, for example, works only with checkout. It doesn't have to know all the design system. It doesn't have to know all the analytics. It doesn't have to know all those parts of the system that is important for the system as a whole. But like if you have a focus team, like 3 people working just this specific path, they can take advantage of the speed of building stuff and just connecting to the main application, right? Not having to do a full like pipeline deployment to build the whole thing just to make sure that they change a button. So the idea here is if you have a medium to large team in a big company or like a big project, you can break it down into smaller micro frontends, and those micro frontends can talk to each other. So I think that's kind of a downside for like small applications because you add a lot of overhead. You have to orchestrate them. You have to make sure that you create some boundaries for specific errors that cannot bubble up. And for small teams, I think this is the downside. But for bigger teams, you're having those problems already. And for bigger companies, like Lululemon, Best Buy, and Epic Games, they all use module federation, and this is why they really need this flexibility of pushing things over the wire to be able to react to client feedback or be able to test things and do very heavily A/B test. And for those specific cases, I think the pros are much better.
Do you know of large companies like that are using this in production?
I think Lululemon is the one that I already mentioned, right? Like they have a huge user case, like they are like super huge e-commerce, and they use module federation. Like if you open their page right now and you look for like remote entry on the network tab, you're gonna see all the JavaScript that comes to it, like as remotes. So they are quite big, and then they really use module federation at production.
But sorry, what was the name of them? Of the company?
Lululemon.
Lululemon?
Oh yes, yeah. Sorry,
Lululemon?
yeah, Lululemon.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I mean,
Okay, yeah, they are like a big company.
Oh, Lululemon, yeah,
Yeah,
apparel,
e-commerce.
clothes, yeah.
Last time that I checked, Adidas has also used
oh,
it.
okay. Lululemon.
Shopify partners, and yeah, you have also. I think Best Buy. I checked, and they also use like Model Federation, and TikTok Web uses as well.
TikTok.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to see, right? Because if you think about TikTok and how many people are there every day, to be able to create something that really scales and stays up no matter what, that shows that, yeah, I mean, there is definitely some pros to be seen there. It also has a lot of challenges, right? Especially when you try to orchestrate those things, and in production it's not easy, and you still need some extra tools to make sure that you can have observability. And this is the area that I think that I see that's start to grow now, where people identify that module feeders is cool, and now they are starting to build more tools around it and make the process a bit more seamless.
So what are so it's talked about scale and when you would want to use this. Are there any anti-patterns or contraindications or whatever term you want to use for when you shouldn't be using this, even if you have appropriate size?
Yeah, I think it also depends on how tightly connected is your system, right? If you, I think first step before module federation, you should be able to break it down into separated areas. So what I see a lot of people failing is that they have a business that it can be very much like one just unit, It's like it might be complex or not, but it's still one unit. So there's no point of breaking this down into different teams or different um, like adopting micro frontends, right? Because module federation is just a layer of communication for micro frontends. That's the only thing that it does. So for those ones, I consider like a bad practice to just jump right away. And what I like to do is actually do the incremental adoption. So a lot of people also just jump the gun and trying to convert everything to, okay, I'm gonna have 10 like little remotes that just do one thing. But in fact, if you just take first the core parts of your business and things that everyone uses, right? For example, analytics, it's something that every system that I build, at some point you have to put some tracking there. It's a very good candidate for micro frontend. And if you start in those boundaries, you have much more chance to succeed because I think there's a lot of information there as well on how to create like specifically micro front ends on this, like specific for this area of like analytics. And then you can start to encapsulate the logic. And then I think later stage you can do UI, you can do all parts of your system as well. But I would start very slow, like separating the most important parts of the system and then migrating things a little bit to the host and remote areas.
So, out of curiosity, I know you mentioned showing one of your apps in your talk, and we got a video link to that in the show notes. Um, do you have any Git repos or anything that shows this in use? Being the visual person that I am, my head is sort of swimming right now, just trying to imagine what code looks like. And so, do you have any actual solid code examples that you can just basic stuff
Yeah,
you can look and play
I,
with?
I, yeah, I can provide as well. I have one repo of a workshop that I did that I did a very small e-commerce where like we have different micro front ends for like checkout for the product list, and was even interesting that you have replication layers because what you can do is you can also mismatch hosts and remotes. So you can have what they call like bidirectional sharing, where I'm a host, but at the same time, I expose part of my system as a remote. So in this specific example, you can see that I have like three endpoints and three files that all of them, they show the same store, but they are different micro frontends. So I think I can share and show the link to the GitHub repo. I just have to open it.
So we've talked about, I'm just looking through the notes we have here. Did we talk about self healing?
Oh yeah, what's that about?
Yeah, this is one of the advanced, I would say, strategies that we can do. It's pretty fun. I also show in one of my talks. I can also share here a link to the GitHub. That's pretty interesting. Is the concept of, for example, in React, the way that we catch errors is through error boundaries, right? So we have those error boundaries that we basically catch exceptions. And the idea here is like, let's say that you have a new version of a button, right? Button, I think it's very easy to visualize, and you want to push this to your current um, micro front end, and you want to have this distribute to production right away. The idea is that you can build a system within your host that if any exception gets caught, you can also tell how to revert to a previous version. So the the dynamic loading of like a new remote can help you to switch those those remotes on the fly. Basically, what it does is, let's say there is an exception being thrown in your application, you can tell to, okay, can you try to get version one, right? And in runtime, we just swap this component and then show you the previous version that was working. So you can have like this capability of self-healing the whole application because now you version um, areas of your code, and this can be swapped over the wire as well. Like on the fly, you can say, well, this little checkout module that I built doesn't work. Trying to get the previous version that was working, and yeah, the user would just perceive something loading in the screen, and then it's going to get the previous version right away. And another thing that's there as well, it's about trying to solve dependencies. So since we have this shared decentralized architecture, let's say that I have a dependency list in one of my micro frontends that's not present on the host, but another micro frontend has it. And what the Webpack module will try to do is just try to solve this dependency on the fly. So it's going to start to go down to the tree asking who has this version of React, for example. And if one of the remotes have it, they would just load for the specific remote. So now even like the dependency tree can be also decentralized. So the main host can like heal itself and try to find the correct dependency.
So it sounds like self-healing is basically just fallback. So if you don't have something, fall back to a previous version or fall back to this other repo
Yeah.
or something like that, right?
Yeah. The difference is that it happens with the user in the page, right? You don't have a reload. It's like literally like you click the button. My example that I show to people in my talk is like you have this specific button that you click. If you click 3 times, they're gonna throw an exception. And what it does, it literally like swap the button to the previous one after the exception being thrown. So you're still gonna be able to capture the error in your Sentry file or whatever system you use for like to track errors. But for the user, it's like, oh, the button just changed, and if I click again, like the whole system still runs and still like keep running, and it doesn't disturb you basically.
So let me make sure I'm still trying to get my head around this a little bit from a build time. You're talking about all these fallbacks where the self-healing term, where okay, this isn't here, so now let's fall back and use this. So how does that work from a bundling and production standpoint? So in other words,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a fallback to something else, but I've pre-bundled everything and it's downloaded to the browser. So is it a dynamic where it's going out and re-importing that JavaScript now, and there you run into the whole issue of all the JavaScript downloading we're trying to do less of to make things faster for slower connections and older phones? Or do you just load the snot out of everything and then it just, ahead of time with huge bundles, and then it's just flipping back and forth in the pre-built JavaScript?
It's dynamic, right? It happens over the network. So the host knows what it needs to like receive all the remotes only, right? So this is the only JavaScript that gets initialized. And as you load those remotes, then you're loading the code that's basically like bundle into it. So this button that I mentioned, it's a micro frontend. So my host doesn't have this button and imports as a JavaScript module, right? It's a normal JavaScript module that's like the same way that you do any kind of import. What it does, and as soon as you enter the page, the module federation plugin will try to solve this module. So it's going to make a request for a certain endpoint. Then you're going to get this JavaScript back over the wire. And this promise will resolve, and then you're going to have the module being injected into your page. So this fallback system, it's at the runtime. So when user like is using the application, basically what happens, another module gets loaded. So you basically make a request to this specific endpoint, and then you get more JavaScript. And then once it's cached, it's in your page. So even if you do the same request again, if it's cached, you're going to get the version that you had before.
So it sounds like you need to make your remotes pretty lean and mean.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides, right? Like it's actually what you mentioned, that I mean, it doesn't come for free. Now you have this dependency of like your code now needs to be orchestrated. You need to tell which parts of your system can be there at like build time, so everything that you need from the start, and whatever else you're gonna have being loaded over the network. And yeah.
So that's not going to be included in a Webpack plugin. Where it is there a meta framework for all of that you're talking about?
So like the module federation plugin would kind of like put into into first build the information on how to do the module resolution basically. So when you run the host application would have the piece of code that knows how to resolve modules.
Okay, but where I'm confused is what is the brand name of the thing that you're talking about?
So yeah, module federation is like the technology. Like it started as this Webpack plugin, and this is what you use um, to do the module resolution, right? It's a Webpack
Well,
plugin that
I get that, but when you're talking about the orchestration layer, like what's the brand name of the orchestration layer that you're talking about?
yeah, that's the whole module federation, right? I don't know if they have a different name to do that. Maybe, yeah, maybe there is more terminology that I'm not aware of it. I'm
Well,
not,
I
yeah,
mean,
I'm not.
okay, so maybe I misunderstood. What do you mean by orchestration layer?
So the idea is you install this plugin in your current project. When you build it, now it will have in your bundle, first bundle, like the information on how to be a host, right?
Mm-hmm.
A host knows how to load remotes. So the information of like, okay, if I made a request to this bundle here, like to this specific JavaScript, I would know how to do the resolution of it. I would know how to load and to request more dependencies or how to just inject into the page. And the remotes are built to also like to output this specific what they call entry point, and it's the specific file that contains the JavaScript that will be included in the page, in the case the remote, once you request it.
Sounds like almost like a Lambda function.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm trying to figure out. Is like, is it tied to a specific infrastructure? Um, is it just you're hosting static files? I'm not. I conceptually, I think I get what you're saying, but
Mhm.
the specific, where does this physically live, or
How do you host
how do
it?
I click the button to have it, roll back or something like
Yes.
that?
Yeah. So this you can create in your system, right? This is like the also the example that I gave in
Sure.
React. I created a little hook that was just like responsible to do the request for me. So basically, the whole system was okay. If you see exception being thrown, do a request to this endpoint here, and now talk with the module resolution to inject this specific module in my page and replace this one. So this is what was doing at runtime. So the difference is with frameworks, again, like React Vite, the idea is that you build once, right? Like you build and whatever you push live stays live. You cannot get code from like different remotes, right?
Mhm.
But in this architecture of like micro front ends, you can use module federation to communicate how you're going to load different modules or different micro front ends.
Okay, so I guess I think we've, unless there's any other topics about this we haven't covered, what's I guess as you put in the notes, what's the takeaway?
Yeah. So I think this is quite exciting, right? Because it's a different approach to what we have seen being becoming more and more popular, where we are adding those frameworks, for example, like Nest.js, where we are building very complex systems and like doing server-side rendering as well and a lot of things. But I think for very huge and large complex applications, the flexibility of being able to push code over the wire and really like have those Lego pieces that connect to each other. This is pretty much needed, right? So I think this is a very interesting, different type of architecture that I believe that's going to evolve more and more and more and become more and more popular. As same as microservice, the idea of microservice, they start to evolve, and people understood where to adopt microservices, where like monoliths make more sense. I think we're going to have something similar to front end and how we build front end.
Okay, well, I know my head is spinning. AJ, I don't know about yours, but this is a definitely a for larger code bases, larger teams, larger companies, and a lot of us may or may not ever see that complexity, but it's certainly out there. So I did find the Webpack Module Federation plugin, and we'll have a link to Vitor's talk on Module Federation. I think you mentioned you give a couple of code examples, and examples was hosted by Prisma, I believe. So we'll put that in there for sure. And with that, we'll wrap up our talk of Module Federation and give my head a rest. And so we'll move on to picks. Picks are part of the show where we get to talk about whatever we want to talk about. It doesn't necessarily have to be tech related. AJ, you got anything for us?
Let's see. I'm excited for the possibility of, well, the reality of the Nintendo Switch 2, but there's not any. Okay, I guess I'll pick the channel where I've been listening to the little tidbits of leaked information here and there as it arises. So there's a channel called Spawn Wave. The guy talks about all sorts of video game stuff, Xbox, PlayStation, whatever. But he's kind enough to put in his description time codes to everything. So whenever he posts a video with Nintendo in the title or description, I just click in the description and go to the part where he talks about Nintendo. And it's been interesting to hear the rumors about the Switch 2, and I'm really hoping that it is in fact backwards compatible. Other than that, I am still going to pick the things that I picked last time because I just have been getting so much valuable information about relationships and the difference between men and women. And in the kind of about a month now that I've been researching this kind of stuff more, the quality of my marriage has improved. So Suzanne Venker with the Suzanne Venker Show, and her podcast, the slogan is something like "Be countercultural," and she speaks hard truths to women, but in listening to her, you can reverse engineer the with both of these people that I'm picking. The other one is Alison Armstrong, and her book, The Queen's Code. It's very, very interesting to hear them speak to women, but then about men and be like, oh, okay, this is the difference. This is where we're miscommunicating. This is why I'm like, why aren't you getting this? Or like, why are you looking at me like I'm stupid? Just a lot of that stuff. And then of course they talk about intimacy as well and have some great tips there. So that's I'm gonna pick that because that's what's those two podcasts. Well, Suzanne Venker has a podcast, and then Alice Armstrong, she has a couple of videos online, but the book, The Queen's Code, is like her condensed version of everything she's learned in the however many decades she's been doing relationship coaching. So I'll go with that. I don't think I have any technical picks for today.
Alrighty, I will go next. Before I get to the high point of every episode, my dad jokes. Got a couple other legit things to pick. Interesting article today regarding transplants. It's an AP article, and I don't know how well known it is, but there's really a shortage of organs available for people that need transplants, whether kidneys, heart, liver, etc. And so in one case here, it happened in, I think it's Washington, D.C. I'm not sure. Oh, it was Maryland. A guy got a pig heart transplanted into himself, and supposedly it's all going well initially. I know that from my very slim understanding of medical technology that I learned from watching ER on TV. I know that they'll use pigs' feet to practice sutures, and pigs have enough morphological similarities with humans that's why they try things like this. So it'd be interesting to see how long this heart lasts in this guy. But if it does work, then that's certainly great for those that are literally dying in need of transplant that are unavailable. Second is a couple articles that I saw on passkeys. I haven't really delved into this too much, and it's basically a way of allowing you to sign into something without passwords. Because I mean, I don't understand that because I know passwords never get hacked and they're always very reliable, but
Yes.
they want to get rid of passwords. I'm kidding, people. And so there's a post. GitHub has them generally available now. They can use passkeys. And then there's a corresponding article about what are passkeys. Found both of these on Hacker News today, written on a place called Tom's Guide. Talks about what are passkeys and everything you need to know about the death of passwords is the title. So I haven't delved into these too much. The best I can understand this from skimming through the article real quick is that basically instead of storing on somebody's server where these keys would be available in a, if there's some sort of data breach or hack, you store them locally. And so anyway, that's all I know right now. We'll put the links in the show notes so that you can read them. And then we get to the dad jokes of the week. So recently I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. And the leaders, I didn't have a lot of faith because the leader started off by saying, "I bet you're all happy to be here." I bet. Anyway, right. So
that one gets a groan.
Yeah, it gets a groan. So the other day, my son came in and told me, he said, "Dad, I watched a guy do 100 straight push-ups. Can you do the same thing?" And I said, "Sure, son. I could probably watch somebody do 500 straight push-ups." I think he just needs to be more specific in his questions, right? Mm-hmm. And then finally, the other night, my wife and I were out somewhere, and we got a flat tire on our way home. We were driving home, and she asked me if I could change a tire. I said, "Why? What I'm wearing is just fine." So those are the dad jokes of the week.
Thank you.
Vitor. Thank you very much. Vitor, what do you have for us for picks?
I have actually two books. I think the first one, I don't know if you are much into music, but I am very much into music production as well. So there is this famous producer called Rick Rubin.
Yes, I've heard the name.
Yes, I absolutely love him, and I really like the way that he handles music production. It's very much different from every other producer. He talks a lot about meditation and removing complexity from music. So he has a book called The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and it's pretty cool. I already bought it. I'm dying to receive it here at home, like waiting for it. It's super cool. And the second one is actually a free book if you want to have online. That's also super nice. It's for Edo's Money. He works at Google, and that's also talks a lot about like philosophy and the ways of seeing life. I like those things a lot. So the book is called The Stoic Mind. So
the what?
It talks the Stoic Mind. So it's talked a lot about Stoicism.
Oh, Stoic. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. Gotcha. And I think the online version is free, and if you want to have the hardcover, I think you pay for it. But it's also very, very nice book.
Talking about music, I used to play. So when I was growing up, I played trumpet going up through high school. Had a lot of fun, but never really continued after college, just because the time. I mean, with something like that, any music, it just takes time to practice and get into it. And so I sort of let that go by the way. But then I picked up guitar a little bit. And I was in college, not enough to I didn't really study. It was, I can play chords, and because I had the musical background. So recently I started taking piano lessons again. And I'm 54 and I'm taking piano lessons for the first time. So that tells you, don't let age stop you. And I had actually started taking them a few years ago from this guy. I won a prize at a fundraiser for a couple of free lessons with this guy. And he does all the accompaniment for my kids' high school. And he's a really good player, really fun. And so I started playing some lessons again. This time I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn it right, learning chord progressions and the keys and all that stuff instead of just, a conversational type approach. And some of the music I've always enjoyed listening to, and And I've tried playing a little bit in the past. So I've taken lessons. Is sort of the new age stuff like George Winston and Suzanne Ciani are a couple of favorites that I've had. Um, and he gave me a song to play, and it's going to take me a while to get to play it, but I'd loved it as soon as I heard it. And it's an Italian guy named Ludovico Einaudi. Never heard of the guy, but he's so good. Oh my gosh, some of his music is just—it's really, you sort of have to like it. You know, if you're a hard rocker, you might not like it, but it's
Yeah.
just great stuff to sit. I sit and listen to it when I'm working.
He's great. I mean,
Oh, so you
there's
know?
a playlist on Spotify called
Uh-huh.
like Peaceful Piano, and
Uh-huh.
he is like the first one there. Like, there's a lot of like tracks from him. Super cool.
Yeah, I got this one. Yeah, he has an album from just recently called Moments of Peace. Um, the piece I'm playing is a little older. It's called I Giorno. Really, really fun song to play. I'm sure my family's tired of hearing me play it now, but I certainly love practicing it. So anyway, point is, Einaudi is a great Einaudi is his last name. Great guy to listen to, but like I said, even don't stop yourself from learning new stuff, even old age like me in my 50s. Alrighty, with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you, Vitor, for coming on and making my head spin with talk of Module Federation. And thanks, AJ, for coming. And if people want to follow you and read more about this, or give you money, or just hear your wisdom, where are the best places to do that?
Yeah, so you can find me in all social media. I have the same handle everywhere. It's Vitor, my name, Vitor M Alencar. So we maybe can share here, but yeah, right now I'm usually like creating more and more content. So you're probably gonna see on YouTube and LinkedIn. I think I'm posting there more and more. So that's, I think, the best place to send me a message if someone has a question or wants to know more about anything that I do.
Alrighty. With that, we will wrap up this episode. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time on JavaScript Jabber.